Punch is a selfish male chauvinist who really wants the world on his terms completely. And anybody that crosses his path is open to being abused one way or another. There are other Punch type figures round the world, but ours is the most aggressive in England. In the tradition, he kills everybody. He has a little ding-dong with them, but ultimately he hits them with a stick, and then the puppeteer takes his hand out of the puppet and Punch twirls them around the stick and throws them out of the back of the booth. And that is considered their sort of symbolic death, right? He throws the baby out of the window into the audience. He's selfish. He tries to eat all the sausages and actually doesn't succeed. Usually the crocodile gets the sausages. A crocodile comes along and bites him. In the tradition, there's a hangman who tries to hang him but ends up getting strung up himself. The policeman suffers the same sort of violent end as does the doctor and the beadle and whoever else. So it's basically Punch and Judy and the sort of work around the baby, and Punch not wanting to do it, and then the other characters come along and Punch berates them and physically abuses them often, but Punch is just a selfish male chauvinist pig.
There hasn't been a huge variation of different versions of Punch and Judy. The main premise is the same, but some of the different characters have changed. For instance, a crocodile appeared in sort of the early 20th century instead of one of the other older traditional characters. And we think that was probably with the popularity of the Peter Pan books by J.M. Barrie that there was the crocodile in there. So it's, I suppose, I find it interesting that it's sort of tried to adapt itself to the contemporary audience of the time. So now they are still shown, but some of the stories are sort of slightly watered down. There's less violence. There's no hangman, for instance. So in a way, I prefer the traditional, original version, but as that stands, it was never fully intended for children. But now it's always seen as a classic seaside child's entertainment.
Punch and Judy has been stretched in all sorts of ways that are worth watching, but if you stretch them too far, they're not Punch and Judy anymore. They become a show based on Punch and Judy. I've seen shows, a Judy and Punch, where Judy is the central character and it's done by a woman. Again, Punch is still selfish and doesn't look after the baby, and they end up doing some very similar things. Part of the tradition of Punch is that you put bits in that are of the present, the 20th century. It doesn't all have to be based on, well, the origin of Punch is actually about 400 years ago, although he didn't look as he does now then. The tradition of Punch always has different things in it for each performer. They put their own stamp on it. The main thing about Punch and Judy is that it's Punch, Judy and the baby, that Punch is selfish, Punch wins. The idea of the traditional Punch was that it was scene after scene after scene to make money from a passing audience, and that the bottler, as he was called, went round with the hat. It's not a hat, but and collected money from the people that were watching. A few pennies, didn't matter. And that if there was a good audience, you could go round again and again and keep the scenes going. I think it's an excellent medium for teaching people, for involving people. Particularly in the Eastern Bloc, puppetry is very strong. I won't be surprised to find it's quite strong in places like China, and wherever there is repression, you can say things in the theatre, and particularly with puppetry, you dare not stand on a street corner and say, because they'll lock you up. The other thing is that in an educational setting, people will work with puppets where they can't be seen. Children who are very shy will make a puppet talk and come alive, where if immediately you turn a camera on them or you expect them to be looked at on stage, they just freeze. So there are all sorts of uses, and I'm sure that it will go from strength to strength. There is a very wide puppetry fraternity, interrelationship now right round the world.
Well, obviously, as when puppetry first began, it was a means of telling stories, as was theatre and toy theatre for children. And obviously, since those days, there are so many different ways and medias of people getting information and knowing stories and understanding about the world. So obviously, its use within religious ceremonies particularly has decreased. But I mean, I think it is a really important tradition to carry on, and you know, many of the puppets you'll see here are sort of tourist versions of traditional things. So they're carried on in some ways, and through tourist rituals and stuff, they do get shown. But it is a bit of a shame that it is something that is on the decline. I mean, Punch and Judy in Britain now is by some people seen as politically incorrect, because if you think about the themes, there is violence, there is murder, all sorts of things which are seen as slightly indelicate for a children's audience now. So it's a difficult one, really. I mean, there are still places that celebrate and embrace puppetry. I mean, for instance, just for children, there's the Puppet Barge in London, there's the Little Angel Theatre, there's also a puppet and model theatre guild, and they all keep up the profile of puppetry in a sort of contemporary audience.
I think it will always go on because it appeals to certain people anyway, and it's a very good method of carrying old stories forward, and just now everybody's getting very interested in it as well. As it turns out, in this country it's always had a tradition of being mainly Punch and Judy, or for very small children. That's the tradition here, but in, say, on the continent and in Japan, other parts of the world, it's very much a grown-up medium, or opera, or whatever. You know, so many different forms. So I don't think it'll ever go away, for sure. And I think it's, at the moment, it's just on the up, and everybody's enjoying all the different possibilities that can happen using puppets. You know, so I think it's a living medium, I would say.
No. Oh, that's that, mate. All over, yes, a long way. No, don't you even look. Dearie me. Oh, he's only little. You stay there, little boy, and you shall punch if he cross you. Cookie dada, ha ha.
A tear, sir. No, tear, sir.
Punch! Oh, no.
Punch!
Thank you for calling me, dearie me. Some people. What am I going to do with you? I got your bottle on. It won't be long. Stay there. Ooh, cookie dada,
God.
And I'm still watching you, yes.